Hi guys. So today we are going to hit the highlights of Chapter 3, Biopsychology. Honestly, I gotta tell you, this one's gonna be hard for me to do in a short amount of time, our time together online. But so like I do before, I want to recommend that you read the chapter on your own. You follow up with any crash courses that links that I make available for you guys, and look over the PowerPoint. So if you need a second for Chapter 3 to get into our Blackboard site, click and find the link for the PowerPoint slides, look for Chapter 3 and open it up, and let's go through some of this stuff. When we talk about biopsychology in this course, it's gonna feel so science heavy, and it can get really science heavy. What I try to do is try to make a broader connection in an intro to psych course like ours, kind of a broader connection between the brain and our behaviors than you would get in a more detailed course. Also gotta tell you that my dog Charlie's in here, and it's a rainy day, and she might start barking if she hears thunder. So if that happens, I'll just try to stop the video for just a second and escort her out of the office. All right, so here we are, Chapter 3, Biopsychology. The first slide on every PowerPoint presentation that I make available to you is the terms. Those are terms that are focal points out of the chapter that you can use as your review sheet. Also, you'll see on our Blackboard site and also on a lot of the PowerPoint slides links to videos, and there's 2 really good crash course videos that go with this topic. There's a crash course video on chemicals, meaning chemicals of the brain, and then another one on the brain itself. So what we're talking about when we talk about biopsychology, it's also referred to neuroscience, neuropsychology as well. It's a very complex topic. But basically we're talking about the connection between human behavior and the study of that behavior. Everything starts with the brain. Everything starts and ends with the brain. There is nothing you can think, feel, want, express. You can't move, you can't function without the main resource center, which is your brain. Brain is where it starts, and that's where we're going to pick apart some of the functioning of the brain. Some major themes about neuroscience is that with modern science, we know so much more about the brain than we did. I started teaching like 20 years ago. Even within the last 5 years, the science involved in studying the brain has just greatly increased. The technology we have to look at what a brain is doing while a person is alive and functioning and thinking, that technology is amazing, and it's only going to get better. It's been through the past few years too. I talked a lot about diagnosing mental illness and other neurodiverse issues that a human can have. We are able to diagnose so much more and treat human beings so much better in the medical and psychological community by looking at the brain itself. Instead of just talking about symptoms and trial and error and are you sad, can you sleep, let's just look at the brain and see where the problem is. And that's why it's a fascinating topic to me. If I'm reading anything outside of stuff for just my classes, it's information on the brain. In fact, if you're interested in the brain after this chapter, there is a book by Dr. John Medina. It's called Brain Rules, and it puts into everyday terms how what we know about the brain, he's a neurologist, can help us day to day. So I highly recommend Brain Rules. There's a Brain Rules for babies that I recommend any student I've ever had who has a baby or know somebody with one, read Brain Rules for babies. There's also a lot of great information from a popular psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Amen, A-M-E-N. He's done more brain scans than any human that's ever existed, and so he's a lot of data and science about brain scans and brain activity. The chapter talks about plasticity, and that's the brain's special capacity for change. In my class, I just really stress to my students the importance of taking care of your brain, especially when you're in the age group of, let's say, like 16 to 24, where your brain is having that last growth spurt, that's going to take your brain to a level where you have to critically think and use wisdom and problem solving and delayed gratification. This last big growth spurt occurs in what we call the prefrontal lobe. We have different lobes or sections of the brain, and the prefrontal lobe is the front of the brain, and that is the part of the brain that has its last growth spurt, that is so important for human beings to cognitively reach their greatest potential, as far as the anatomy of the brain itself. So it's a catch-22, because an adolescent and a young adult's brain isn't fully developed, so they're not making the best decisions based on taking care of their brain. And if I could just employ my students to think about the importance of taking care of their brain, what does that look like? Some things are obvious, some things maybe not. Getting good sleep is one of the best things you can do to help grow the brain and the body all throughout childhood, but also during adolescence. In fact, there's current studies that suggest that sleep and getting good amount of sleep in your young adult stages helps defer early Alzheimer's symptoms. So Alzheimer's and sleep are correlated even years apart. Things you can do to protect your brain, protect it physically from injury. It worries me, I got to be honest, and I've had students that have struggled with concussions and the damage that is done at the age that it was done. And if you don't get the right amount of treatment immediately after having a concussion, you potentially could have damage. So we know there are things you can do if you had a concussion, and these are things that you can Google and start working on repairing your brain. So when I say the brain uses what's called plasticity, it means it can grow and change, adapt, and heal. And that's why if you do have a brain injury, or you haven't practiced good brain habits, you can change those at any age, and you should. So other common sense things to protect the brain in adolescence and young adulthood is, don't drink, don't do drugs. Drugs and alcohol damage the brain at any age, but you're most susceptible to that damage as a young adult. Highly warn against young adults drinking to the point of passing out. Passing out is a mechanism that your brain has when it is at the point of potential dysfunction and damage. It's like your brain shutting down. It's not good. So protect your sweet brains. You're going to need them. You're going to want them. Do what you can. And if you haven't done it in the past, you can start today. And then there's things like exercise and meditation that also play into a healthy person and a healthy brain. We know a lot of data now about how good meditation is to the human brain and repairing and recovering and helping it to grow. So don't take that for granted. I think a lot of people do take their brain for granted, and you shouldn't. Now, the slide number 3 is the characteristics of a neuron. Now, I'm not going to go over the anatomy of a neuron, even though it is important to note this, that these are the basic parts of the cell. And these neurons, it's important for all the parts to be working properly and correctly, because these neurons are the communication system throughout your body. The majority of neurons, and these are highly specialized cells. The majority of them are in your brain, but there are also neurons and different types of neurons throughout the whole entire body. So when you know what each part of the neuron does, then oftentimes it makes it easier to understand that if there's a problem in the system, in the communication system, then it can result in things like Alzheimer's or depression or Parkinson's disease or other neurological issues. So neurons communicate 2 ways, electrically and chemically. And what that basically means is if you're looking at a neuron and you're looking at the diagram of a neuron, then there's all, it kind of looks like a fried egg with little spiky things coming off of it. But when that little fried egg is surrounded by all these other little fried egg looking cells with spiky things, and they are communicating for you to move your mouth, or you move your eyes, or think something, or for your breakfast to digest. All these things are working all the time in your body. That's what it means by communication. And the electrical part of communication of a neuron is within the neuron there is a nucleus, and within that nucleus there's literally an electrical charge that helps kind of jumpstart that cell to communicate with the next cell, and on and on and on. They also communicate chemically. And when we say chemically, we mean that neurons produce or release these things called neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are messages. So if they're the main line of communication, if they're the trucks and getting the information from the bottom of your toe to the top of your brain and back, if you stub your toe, you get a message to your brain, ouch, that hurts. Your brain tells you to grab your foot, or say a bad word because it hurts so bad, or go get ice. All these processes are happening. One, because there's an electrical charge within that little cell, and two, there's these little messages between them, where one neuron releases a message and the other neuron absorbs the message, and that system goes on and on and on and on. So when we say electric, we mean that. When we say chemical, we mean neurotransmitters. There's different types of neurons. There are sensory neurons, motor neurons, interneurons, and these have different jobs depending on what the message is. I mean, it makes sense. If it's a sensory neuron, then it's communicating sensory experiences through your organs and your sight and smell and taste and touch, those types of things, and relaying messages to and from the brain and to your internal organs. Your motor neurons help your muscles to relax or contract, and movement. Interneurons are the type of neurons that send information from one neuron to the next. So if you would look at the chart on slide 3 and just kind of get a brief idea of what all the parts of the neuron does, then I think that will be enough information to give you a basic idea of part of that communication system. So if you go down to slide 4 and 5, 4 is what I just talked about. Communication between neurons is chemical, and within a neuron is electrical. I don't want to go and take time talk about action potential, or what's called the all or none law. This is just basically a diagram of what happens electrically within that neuron, within that nucleus of that neuron. This is the electrical impulse that occurs for a neuron to be able to function. And then you have neurotransmitters and their effects. So before we get into the list of neurotransmitters, we have to talk about the highway system, the transportation system that these messages travel by. So work with me here. So we have ways of looking at this. We have neurons, neurotransmitters, and the nervous system. The nervous system, if you look on slide 7, is all the pathways throughout the body that go to and from the spinal cord, to and from the brain, to release messages. So all the messages, all the things your brain is telling your body to do, has to travel through this thing called the nervous system. And there's parts to the nervous system. So I think if you're writing your notes, you say the nervous system is like the transportation highway. Okay, then you have the messengers. The messengers are the neurons. So they're using the system to communicate. And within the messenger is a message saying, think, stop, go, breathe, feel, swallow, blink. All those messages are traveling through the system, through the neurons and the nervous system. So the nervous system is broken into sections. So let's look at a quick review of the sections. And this is on slide 9. The nervous system is separated into 2 major categories. You have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system makes sense, goes down the center of your body. It is the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the brain and some of the parts of the brain in a minute. On the other side, less probably obvious, is the peripheral nervous system. You remember if you ever took a driver's education class and you talked about peripheral visions that go out to the, being able to see on the sides. Well, that's your peripheral nervous system. So you have the brain and the spinal cord go down the center of the body, and anything that branches off of that, all those highways and freeways and roads and passageways that go to and from the brain and spinal cord is the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is broken up into subdivisions as well. First, you have what's called the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. And these, again, are part of the peripheral nervous system. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary muscles and transmits sensory information to and from the brain. All right, great. So if it's somatic, it's traveling through the somatic nervous system. That's what's controlling voluntary muscles. Voluntary. What do you do voluntarily? I'm moving my mouth voluntarily. I'm moving my hands, even though it feels like I'm doing that automatically. I'm not. I move my hands when I talk. That's a voluntary muscle movement. My super awesome dance moves, walk and movement, and even telling my eyes where to look is a voluntary muscle movement. So all that is controlled through the somatic. If you go to the opposite side, you have what's called the autonomic nervous system, and that controls involuntary bodily functions. So within that group, you have a whole system that is working in your body that is controlled automatically, even though your brain is doing it. Thank goodness, right? Because automatic processes would be breathing, and you just breathe. You don't have to remember. I'm really good at sending reminders to myself, to-do lists, calendar notices, all that stuff. If I had to remember to breathe, that would be a problem, because I would get distracted and stop breathing and die. So we don't want that to happen. So my body and my lungs, my brain tells my lungs to breathe. My brain tells my food to digest and tells my heart to beat. There are processes that are happening right now all the time, 24/7. In fact, in a newborn baby, this is the part of the brain that's fully developed at birth. Thinking and planning and language and problem solving, that's a part of the baby's brain that continues to grow, especially the first 3 years of life. And again, like I said, that last growth spurt at the end of adolescence, those things are still growing. And it's like the brain grows from and evolves from back to front. The back of the brain is responsible for heartbeat, breathing, reflexes, those digestion, sleeping, staying awake, staying asleep. These are all basic things apart that when a newborn baby is born, that's about all they can do. And not very good at it, even the sleeping part. But as that brain grows and as that brain develops, matures, and evolves, and good experiences are given to that newborn baby and infant, they're hugged, they're cuddled, they're sung to, they're read to, they're given good nutrition, they're given positive experiences, they're given sensory experiences. All these things grow that little baby brain, and it continues to grow. The first 3 years is a big growth spurt, and there's a lot of pruning that occurs after that 3 years. So if you don't get that baby certain positive experiences, it can make that child struggle in learning later in life. Again, that book, Brain Rules for Babies, it almost like gives you a manual if you're pregnant or if you're a caregiver of a baby. Read that, because it basically shows you how to grow the best brain ever. Now, brain growth starts in the womb before a baby's even born, but there are so many great things you can do with a child from 0 to 3 years old that help grow a great brain. Isn't that cool? I geek out on stuff like that. So then you have growth spurt all through childhood, and then that last growth spurt in late adolescence, early adulthood. So that's how it grows from back to front. So all these basic systems, the back of the brain are developed at birth because we have to know how to breathe. We have to know how to swallow. We have to be able to do those things to survive. And that's all a part of the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is broken into two sections. You have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So these things are still automatic, But the sympathetic nervous system arouses the body to expend energy, and the parasympathetic nervous system calms the body down to reserve and maintain energy. What does that mean? That means as human beings, most of the time, our autonomic nervous system's working under the category of the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning that we should just be calm, and we should have just regular, breathing and regular heart rate, and being relaxed and reserving our energy. That's just a chill mode. That's just a parasympathetic nervous system mode. But the sympathetic nervous system is there for a reason too, and that's when our fight or flight mechanisms kick in. You've probably heard of fight or flight before. It's what human beings do, and I'm sure animals do it too. I just know about humans. It's what human beings do when they are threatened, scared, fearful, upset, whatever you want to call it. There's a switch that turns off our parasympathetic nervous system and it turns on our sympathetic nervous system. So look at the next slide, which is what I like to call Snake Guy, whose organs are showing. It's very embarrassing. Nobody talks about it when we're around him, but this is my friend whose organs are showing all the time. And what this diagram shows is my friend, let's call him Bill. Doesn't he look like a Bill? This shows Bill when his sympathetic nervous system is triggered, and then when he calms down and he goes back to that parasympathetic nervous system. And so in this case, it's a snake. Bill doesn't know if the snake is poisonous or not. Most of us, even though snakes don't bother me that much, especially non-poisonous snakes, I think if you saw a snake in the wild, your sympathetic nervous system's going to rev up no matter what. Maybe not, but most people. But until he knows he's safe, he freaks out. So that snake makes certain biological things change in his body. If you look at the list, it's things like his pupils dilate. His pupils dilate when he's freaking out. I think that's interesting. Evolutionarily speaking, it's probably to let more light and more information into your brain. But it's just when your sympathetic nervous system is triggered, this fight or flight response, it's to help you to survive. So these things are happening, helping you to survive a threatening experience. The mouth salivation is inhibited, meaning your mouth dries up, meaning that when you're freaking out, you're not thinking about eating. Also, if you want to take it to another psychological level, that's why it's unhealthy to eat when you're upset. Because one of the first things that happens when your body is stressing out, or you feel anxiety, or you have a real threat in front of you, is that your digestive system shuts down. And that's because you're not supposed to be freaking out and eating at the same time as a healthy human being. When you eat and your mouth is dry and your digestion system is slow and you're not really processing your food, you should be relaxed and eating calmly and slowly. But when you don't, this is kind of another level to this, you are putting wear and tear on your metabolism. Meaning you're making your body work extra hard to break down and metabolize your food and use it for energy. When you don't metabolize your food, you gain weight. And this is the reason why it's not a good idea to eat when you're stressed out and upset, because you're not really slowly breaking down that food, using it for energy, doing the things you need to do. It kind of sits there. It's like eating a phone book for lunch. It just clumps through your system and you don't digest it well, and you definitely don't metabolize it well. So one of the best diet tips or nutrition tips I can give you is when you eat slowly, eat relaxed, and eat your food with a lot of water, so that you're breaking it down and you can process that food and it doesn't just sit there. So we're going back to Bill. Bill's food wouldn't be digesting well when he saw the snake. His mouth dries up. His lungs start to breathe more shallow and rapidly. His heart beats faster, so it's pumping the blood to his muscles and his extremities so he can be super strong and protect himself in that moment. His palms start to sweat because sweat glands are stimulated during the sympathetic nervous system. And again, the stomach and intestines inhibit digestion. So this is what the human body was meant to do in an emergency. Good. Lift that car off that baby. Grab your child and run out of a burning home. If you're upset or you would avoid it, you fix the problem, you move on. And then when the stressful event is over, then the parasympathetic nervous system comes into play. You calm down and all those things go back to normal. Here's the connection you need to make with psychology and biology. When you are operating under the sympathetic nervous system, it does damage to your body and your mind because it's supposed to be a short period of time. Humans that first walked the earth could deal with a tiger, fight it, flight it. That's a story for another time. I don't know if you're going to run from the tiger. I don't know if you're going to try to fight the tiger, but your brain's going to prepare you to survive in that moment. Good for you. You will survive, you will procreate, and you will live on and on and on. However, in our modern society, the damage we see to human health is often associated with the sympathetic nervous system not calming down. What if the threatening event is losing your job and you can't pay your bills, so you're stressed day after day after day? What if the threatening event is an abusive relationship and you're always afraid and you don't know what to expect and your sympathetic nervous system is triggered day after day after day? So my point is this: we need to be aware of the sympathetic nervous system, because if we are revved up, stressed out, tense for a long period of time, then you're going to have secondary health issues. I mean, think about it. If your heart is beating to survive in a moment and it lasts a long period of time, you're doing extra wear and tear on your heart. Heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, those kinds of associated illnesses. If your blood is rushing from your internal chilled out organs and you're stressed out, so it's going to your muscles and your backs and your legs, then you're going to have back pain, neck pain, muscle pain, because it's supposed to come and then it's supposed to go away. And when it doesn't, then you have chronic pain. You can have things like skin issues, digestive issues, headaches, a hard time concentrating. That's because it's just using up all those resources for that temporary emergency when the temporary emergency doesn't go away. So what do? You learn, and we will talk about this in the chapter on stress, how to manage stress. You realize that in today's world, even though it's no longer a tiger and it's probably not a snake, that there are real stressors within our life that put a lot of wear and tear on our bodies. And long-term wear and tear on the body is associated with cancer, heart disease, and autoimmune deficiency disorders. So it's extremely important to recognize them and learn coping mechanism and health mechanisms that you can use as a young person at any age, really, to help your body relieve that stress. I know that my husband and I have gotten really a lot better at this as we've gotten older. And these are things I would have fought when I was younger. And my husband is excellent at exercising when he is stressed out. And that helps level out his nervous system, if you will. For me to level out those chemicals, I have found that meditation and yoga do a really good job, and getting good amounts of sleep and eating healthy. Those are things that I can do for my body to deal with stressful events so that it doesn't do long-term damage. Man, if y'all learn that, that's almost everything you need to know about psychology. So the nervous system is, functioning as these pathways that these messages go to and from the body and the brain. The neurotransmitters, as I said before, are these chemicals that the brain and the body produce. The majority of these chemicals reside in your brain and in your gut. And these chemicals are associated with certain roles and things that your body are supposed to do, these messages, and also associated disorders. So on slide number 12, there is information about the important neurotransmitters in the field of psychology. Not that there's not more neurotransmitters than these, but these are the primary ones that you should know and study and be able to know in your intro to psych course. So going through the list pretty quickly because you can read it. There's a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. The next column there is what it's responsible for doing in our body. So we produce acetylcholine in our body and brain, and it helps us when we're trying to learn something. So you might be producing acetylcholine right now. Look at you. And then it's also associated with memory and muscle contractions. So when your muscles move, you're using acetylcholine. Isn't that interesting? I think everything's interesting, but like learning and moving go together. I have a son that suffers from ADHD, and so it's a learning disability. But what I've learned about him, he's now older and is a really good student. But when he was younger, he learned best when he was moving. But he'd also get in trouble in school when he was moving. So it was contradictory to way that teachers typically run their classrooms, and I understand that. But when we would study for his like STAR test and things like that as a kid, if he could be walking around the room, and we'd study for science tests and like the parts of a plant or the sun and the planets, if he was up moving around, he would memorize and learn better. It's not a coincidence. There's a chemical there. And so moving is a good thing when we're learning. And then an associated disorder is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, most of us have some awareness of what that is, but that's when acetylcholine stops being produced in the brain. And when you have a medication for that, so if your brain stops producing acetylcholine, in theory, and you're not making that chemical naturally, then you can take an outside chemical that's been invented that looks to your brain like acetylcholine. So your brain goes, oh, I need that. I need acetylcholine so badly. And it starts helping reduce the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. However, like with most supplements or medications or drugs, after a while, the brain needs more and more of the outside acetylcholine to do the job of helping reduce Alzheimer's symptoms. And then it gets what's called tolerance, where it stops working altogether. So anytime we talk about a chemical your brain naturally makes, you have to understand that a lot of times with drug addiction and tolerance of any drugs, it's because your own chemical stops being produced, and now you're dependent on this outside chemical to do what your brain used to could do on its own. And then after a while, it's not enough. You need more and more and more, and then it doesn't work, or you can have serious side effects. That's a good transition into dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for movement, so some of these things double up. Thought processes and rewarding sensations. I think it's interesting that science uses the term rewarding sensation. So when you feel happy, your brain produces dopamine. You know what makes me feel happy? Well, a lot of things. My kids, my husband, going on a bike ride, going on the boat, my dog. Dogs help produce dopamine if you like them. So in this moment, let's see if this works, because Charlie's down there and she makes me so happy. I'm going to help produce dopamine in some of your brains. Char, come here, baby. She's asleep, but I'm going to get her up. Char, come here, love. Come here, babe. Come here. Come say hi to the students and give them a dopamine rush. Come on, love. Come on. Come on. All right. Up, up. Up, up. Up, up. Here she comes, y'all. I promise. Okay. Who needs a dopamine rush? Here she is. Say hi. No, you gotta look at... Oh, she's gonna give me a kiss. This is my dopamine rush for the day. Can you look at the camera? This is Charlie, the dog. Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny that dogs can give us a rush to our brain of happy... Okay, you can lay down. I appreciate it. Thank you. There's my dopamine rush. Find your dopamine rush. Find your natural high. And it's not a coincidence that dopamine is called dopamine, because dope is synthetic dopamine. And that gives you a fake high, not a real high, not a dog or your boyfriend kissing your face, but a real reaction of a rewarding sensation or something that makes you happy.